So I've been reading a bit of Ryan Holiday's The Obstacle is the Way, The Timeless Art of Turning Trials into Triumph. And it's a book that draws on the philosophy of Stoicism, but it's a modern take on it. It's not trying to be, it's not trying to just present the classical thinkers. It's trying to sort of apply the ideas of Stoicism in a practical way for modern life, which is a genre of book that I am finding myself enjoying as of late. And so I wanted to make a video with a few comments. So I've highlighted a few things here. In this chapter, he's talking about the relationship between how you perceive things and your ability to overcome problems. And there was a particular passage that jumped out at me, which I'll read through now, starting here. So at the bottom of the left page on the screen, where one person sees a crisis, another can see opportunity. Where one is blinded by success, another sees reality with ruthless objectivity. Where one loses control of emotions, another can remain calm. Desperation, despair rather, fear, powerlessness. These reactions are functions of our perceptions. You must realize nothing makes us feel this way. We choose to give in to such feelings, or like Rockefeller, we choose not to. And John D. Rockefeller's a frequently mentioned example in this chapter. I highlighted one thing where it just mentions that he was a very tough witness for the federal prosecutors because he would never rise to their bait or get upset or do anything. Um, so anyway, the part that struck me was the bit about choosing to give into such feelings because that's not how, like, I agree with that. I agree with what the author is saying, but it's not how a lot of people see it. Um, they view their emotions as almost external forces in a way, um, that just come upon them. And I think part of the issue is that there's a sort of naive way of thinking about it, which would be wrong in terms of emotions and choice, where you just, I don't know, where you tell somebody, well, just get over it, you know? And it's like, well, I mean, presumably if it was that easy, they if they could just make an arbitrary choice, you know, and just flip a switch and make the decision and have it take, like, you buy something at a store and then that's it and you're done. And you choose and the transaction is finished. Um, if it was that sort of, if people are thinking that choice in the context of emotions means that sort of choice, then that would be wrong. But you can make choices in regards to emotion. One example, on a meditation session that I was listening to today, uh, September 13th, on the Waking Up app, the like daily meditation on there, said essentially Sam Harris said basically, spend your day choosing to try to be 50% less emotionally reactive to stuff. Um, Now you'd say, well, I mean, you could try that and maybe it would work and maybe it wouldn't. Well, right, you might not fully succeed in that goal, and the percentage of emotional reactivity is kind of a hard thing to gauge anyway, because it's kind of, the numbers there are kind of a metaphor. You can't really get out an emotional reactivity ruler, but you can choose to focus. What you can do, you can choose to focus your mind on that idea and try it, and likely you'll have some sort of success with it, even if rather than actually reducing your activity by 50%, whatever that might mean, you just having that idea in your head kind of helps you pull back from the brink of like extreme anxiety or something like that. That's still something. And it's something that you can accomplish by choosing to direct your mind and your mental energy and focus in a particular way. So it's not that you can choose your emotions like you can choose to flip a light switch, but you can choose your emotions like you can choose to get in shape. It's not one and done. It's a course of sustained regular effort. And I think that's a good analogy, because I think most people understand that you can't, to actually get in shape in a sustained way is not like, it's not like an arbitrary choice. It's not like a, crash efforts tend to not work very well. Just like trying to do it really quickly. Um, it's best achieved and done with a change in habits sustained over time, which lead to gradual improvement and getting closer to your goal. People understand that that's how muscles work. Like you have to build them up over time, but they don't apply that same sort of framework of thinking to their emotional states. They might think you can change them. And then, like I said, if you say, well, no, you can, then they don't get that you're talking about it, changing them gradually through sustained effort. And so Mr. Holliday says, we can learn to perceive things differently, to cut through the illusions that others believe or fear. We can stop seeing the problems in front of us as problems. We can learn to focus on what things really are. So the idea of, to frame it as learning is like, it's something that requires effort and thought and sustained active energy to achieve. So I pulled this quote from the Ayn Rand lexicon about focus, and particularly the last lines here. Psychologically, the choice to think or not is the choice to focus or not. Existentially, the choice to focus or not is the choice to be conscious or not. Metaphysically, the choice to be conscious or not is the choice of life or death. So, and then at the beginning, in any hour and issue of his life, man is free to think or evade that effort. Thinking requires a state of full focused awareness. The act of focusing one's consciousness is volitional. So that's essentially the choice you make when you think, when you choose to think, is the choice to direct your mental energy and attention towards some specific issue or question or what have you. So to extend the analogy that I was talking about earlier, you don't choose directly to build muscle strength, right? You don't say, okay, biceps, right? What you can do though is choose to lift weights over and over again of a progressively heavier nature, and doing a variety of exercises. And then if you make that choice in a sustained way, then you'll have a predictable outcome. And this is Elliott Temple's emotions essay, which I always think is good to refer to when contemplating these issues. He talks about, so he says, some people are pessimistic about their ability to change their emotions. They think that emotions are biological or natural, and that emotions aren't ideas, knowledge, or traditions. They think it follows that emotions can't be changed any more than we can change our hair color. Of course, hair color is although hair color is genetically determined, we can change it. It just takes dye. Similarly, if one is born without legs, that is a big problem, but it's also a changeable, improvable situation. One can get prosthetic legs or a wheelchair. Genetic causes do not mean we're helpless. And skipping ahead a little, many people think sex. Oh, is that a typo? Many people think of sexual lust as something. Yeah, I'll flag that as something they have almost no hope to change because they can't imagine being in control of it compared to, say, getting angry, sad, or happy, which they know that sometimes people manage to change to have some control over. But William Godwin explained, it's a little bigger, but William Godwin explained that sexual lust is a matter of ideas that we can make choices about. He pointed out that sexual pleasure is actually fragile. People will go to great lengths to avoid being disturbed because it ruins the pleasure and they lose the mood. He also pointed out that if someone is having sex and as immersed in that as experience as can be, he will still forget about it and sober up in seconds if you inform him that his father has died or anything he considers significantly more important than sex. He will stop in the middle if his reason tells him something else matters more. And so, and this also connects with some stuff later in the Holiday book where he talks about using logic to defeat emotions. Elliott, talks about reason telling you that something else matters more. So the point is that we have more control over our emotional state than is commonly believed. So another quote from the holiday book, he says, just because your mind tells you something's awful or evil or unplanned or otherwise negative doesn't mean you have to agree. Just because other people say that something's hopeless or crazy or broken to pieces doesn't mean it is. We decide what story to tell ourselves or whether we'll tell one at all. So I thought that was good. So regarding choosing to tell yourself a particular story, uh, there's this bit later on in the practice objectivity chapter. See, the chapters are pretty small. Um, Marcus Aurelius had a version of this exercise where he described glamorous or expensive things without their euphemisms. Roasted meat is a dead animal, and vintage wine is old fermented grapes. The aim was to see these things as they really are, without any of the ornamentation. And I thought that was interesting because, people use it in a bit of a different context than, or for a different purpose than the author's using it. People often feel deprived or sad that they don't have something, and you can improve that through choosing the framing that you decide to put on it. And you can do that almost regardless of circumstances. Like, for example, suppose you're doing well financially and you can afford a nice bottle of wine. In that situation, you could imagine yourself not in the circumstance of where you could afford such a bottle. And then that could give you a greater appreciation of the fact that you can afford the nice bottle of wine. But then on the other hand, suppose that you can't afford the nice bottle of wine, your financial circumstances are different, they're not as good. Well, then you can say, well, it's just some old fermented grapes, anyways, and I have the actual important things in life, like, you know, or even the material things, like if you have food and a place to live and, internet, right? The very basics, you can choose to appreciate that. So that the choice of the perspective to take, and like it's not arbitrary. You're not faking reality in either from either perspective. You're just choosing where to direct your focus and attention in order to appreciate your circumstances better and have a better emotional experience of them. If so, in my first example where you're doing well financially, well, you can hypotheticalize that you weren't, and that's valid to do that, and then you get more appreciation. And then, in the second case, if you focus on the that it's just some fermented grapes, well, that's true. It is. Um, it's a valid point. You shouldn't feel bad about your inability to, afford some expensive fermented grapes. So, like, it doesn't, not worth beating yourself up over. So, okay. Yeah, so in this part, in this chapter, Control Your Emotions, Holiday talks about uh, defeating emotions with logic. And he counsels that he's not advising emotional suppression, which is a very common thing that people do and a very common misinterpretation of Stoicism. And I like this little dialogue that he does. He says, we can defeat emotions with logic, or at least that's the idea. Logic is questions and statements. That's a little general of a description, but okay. With enough of them, we get to root causes, which are always easier to deal with. So then he's got this dialogue, which would be, I mean, he's italicized rather, the one of the speakers, but be better with labels, but okay, whatever. So we lost money, but aren't losses a pretty common part of business? Yes. Are these losses catastrophic? Not necessarily. So this is not totally unexpected, is it? How could that be so bad? Why are you all worked up over something that at least is occasionally supposed to happen? Well, so yeah. And in particular, I recommend actually having a self dialogue. Like imagine, you know, and even write it out. Imagine, because sometimes you might need a minute to think about your response. It's not always nearly so quickly, but it can be a very helpful tool for debugging yourself. He talks about dealing with anxiety. It might help to say it over and over again whenever you feel the anxiety begin to come. I am not going to die from this. And he repeats it a few times. I thought that was interesting because, you know, one similar thought I've had is sort of emotional range or level or volume. Like, so if I'm upset about something, and at least part of me thinks that I'm being ridiculous and being upset over something trivial, one thing I reflect on is, okay, suppose I had like a cancer diagnosis, or somebody that I cared about had a cancer diagnosis. Um, could I be, would I be more upset about that? Like, is there, and it's a sort of a way of asking, could I be more upset than I am now? Or am I maxed out? And if I'm maxed out, or just about maxed out, then that's worth some thought, because there's some idea there that your level, there should be some proportionality between the severity of the emotional reaction and the circumstances. Okay. So, like, you know, if you stub your toe, shucks. If somebody you cared about dies, that's more severe, right? Like that makes it intuitive sense to people, I think. Um, so then if you're maxing out about something that you think is trivial, if there's no sort of emotional range or volume that's louder than the emotional reaction you're having right now to something trivial, there is something weird going on. And you're not, part of your mind is not being reasonable. So I think that's something to think about. And he says, Holiday says, or try Marcus's question. Says, what happened keep you from acting with justice, generosity, self-control, sanity, prudence, honesty, humility, straightforwardness? I mean, that's sort of a leading question, but like, you can still do all those things, right? So there was one chapter that I thought was actually had some sections that were unusually bad. So I've mostly been praising the book, so just to add some criticism on there. Um, so he tries to make this point that he's saying lots of big businesses have started during economic depressions. Um, the founders they didn't know or really care because they were too busy just dealing with their circumstances. Um, and then he says, in our own lives, we aren't content to deal with things as they happen. We have to dive endlessly into what everything means, whether something is fair or not, what's behind this or that, and what everyone else is doing. So he's sort of putting together in a package some stuff that I don't know. I don't think should be packaged together. And there's a sort of an anti-explanation attitude that kind of gets worse as the chapter goes along. He says, those people with an entrepreneurial spirit are like animals blessed to have no time or ability to think about the ways things should be or how they'd prefer them to be. Like, what? That's ridiculous. Um, to say that. Now, I think maybe if like I dialogued with him, he would concede the point and say he was talking about something else. But as written, like you want to say, Steve Jobs or the other inventors, uh, or the great industrialists had no time or ability to think about the way things should be or how they prefer them to be, that their entrepreneurial energy and effort was directed towards making their thoughts about how things should be happen. Like that was the guidepost for them. So I just thought that was a really weird statement. And then he goes on. For all species other than us humans, things just are what they are. Our problem is that we're always trying to figure out what things mean, why things are the way they are, as though the why matters. Emerson put it best, we can't spend the day in explanation. That's a terrible quote. Terrible quote. The reason that humans are able to be successful in the world is because they have the capacity of explanation and reason and logic, which in some contexts Holiday seems to appreciate. So it's just like it's kind of an off the rails chapter, It's kind of weird and contrary to some other stuff. So he continues on. The implications of our obstacle are theoretical. They exist in the past and the future. We live in the moment. The more we embrace that, the easier the obstacle will be to face and move. Well, I mean, if you're trying to, I don't know, build a self-driving car, you're going to have to deal, you know, the sub problems of that you're going to have to deal with are reflected in the reality of your work in the moment. So you're still going to have to figure out how to address them. Like they're not just theoretical; they're actual problems in terms of safely navigating streets and all that. So yeah, this chapter I did not like. Basically, like I liked this the beginning, where he's talking about all these businesses came out of depressions or recessions or panics. These like great industrial companies uh, and service companies, but then the direction he took that was kind of bad. So okay, I think I'll wrap up this video for now.